welcome back to the Sheol Podcast. Today, we are joined by Josie Varga, who has been researching the afterlife for over 15 years. She helps others understand that death is just a transition. Before we dive in, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share this episode with your friends. It really helps us grow and brings us more great guests. So now let's get into this conversation with Josie. So thank you for being here.
Oh, my pleasure. How long have you been doing this?
We've been doing this podcast for, I think, a year and a half, almost 2 years.
Okay, that's good. And you had Bruce Grayson on?
I had Bruce Grayson on. That was the first time that I felt really validated in us doing this.
Yeah. Well, he's a friend of mine, and I have tremendous respect for him. So.
Oh yes, me too. I when you talk to certain people, he responds to emails that are not about appearances, and that just kind of caught me off guard because it's not everybody is that open, But
right. No, he really cares about what he does, and he is very approachable. I met with him at the University of Virginia with my two daughters, no less. And we sat in the cafeteria, and there we are, the four of us eating sandwiches with Dr. Bruce Grayson, So he's a great guy, I consider it a privilege to know him.
Yeah, I feel the same way. I don't know if there's much... I'm really big on authenticity just in my personal life, and he's one of those people that when you meet him, he absolutely is showing you who he is in the first moment. So,
absolutely, I agree.
Well, we love Bruce Grayson, but we were going to talk about you.
Okay. All right, go ahead.
So, you were a journalist, right? And you've been working in near-death experience research for 15 years now. Is that right?
Over 20 now, Justin.
20. Wow.
And it was not something that I ever thought I would do. Life has a way of leading us in different directions. What happened was I had always planned on writing a book, and I had written a book called Footprints in the Sand, which talks about my life. I was born with a disability, with cerebral palsy, and I worked as a journalist, and people would say things to me like, my God, how did you get here? You've accomplished a lot in your life despite your disability. And I decided to write the book. We get to, I'll tell you more about that, but the end of the book includes an epilogue about my husband's friend who died in the World Trade Center attacks. And how he ended up in the book is kind of, I don't know, ironic, because I had finished the book, and my husband John said, wait a minute, I got this email from Rich, and he talked about the death of his own father. And he talked about how each wasted minute in life was a crime. And it was very inspiring. And John said to me, you think, you could put this in your book? And I read it, and I was so moved by it. So I included it in the epilogue of the book. So now go to 2003. I have, my daughter was just born in July. This is August. I have another daughter who's 19 months old, or 18 months really. They're 19 months apart. And I have this vivid, lucid dream, like nothing I'd ever experienced before in my life. And in this dream, I'm kind of like walking, I see myself walking down this long hallway. And I come to this door on the right, and I walk in, and I see desks and windows everywhere. So I'm kind of like looking around, and all of a sudden, I see Rich. Now, Rich Lee was my husband's friend and former boss who passed in the World Trade Center attacks. Justin, I never met him before. Okay. I spoke to him on the phone once, but that was it. I saw pictures of him. He would send like Christmas cards, so I saw a picture of him and his wife and his son, but never met him in person. But yet in this dream, I automatically knew it was him. And I looked up at him and I was kind of like shocked. And I said to him, first of all, remember I said I mentioned him in the book, in Footprints in the Sand? Well, his first words to me were, and when I say words, it wasn't really words, it was telepathic communication, it was mind-to-mind communication. And he basically communicated, "Hey, Josie, thank you for mentioning me in your book." And my response to that, for reasons I cannot explain, but my response to that was, "Rich, you have to prove to me that this is really you." And he looked at me with kind of like this smirk on his face and walked over to a desk and picked up a phone that looked like one of those Motorola flip phones at the time. They had just come out at that time. So he opens up this phone and he shows it to me, and on the phone is a picture of him, his wife, and his son. And he says, "Boston is okay. Boston is okay." And when he said that to me, I didn't have any idea why he said that or what it meant. I only understood intuitively that this was a message I needed to get to his wife. Okay? Next thing you know, the only way I can describe it, I kind of felt like I was going through some sort of a window. And I'm on what looks like the street. And I know this doesn't make sense, but this is how I perceived it at the time. I look out and I see him in what looks like the bed of a pickup truck. That's what it looked like to me. And he's standing behind his wife and son, and he's looking at me, and he kind of goes, "Okay, Josie, give them the message," and sort of pushes me forward, okay, like with his hands. And when he did that, I woke up in a sitting position, panting and out of breath. I mean, literally, I woke up and I was like, like that. And I jumped out of bed, and the first thing I did is I run into my daughter's rooms, and I went to go check on the kids. They were okay. They were still sleeping. My husband had gone to work really early. He worked in the financial field. And I called him up, and I told him what happened, and I said, "Okay, now, you have to give him the message that Boston is okay." And how do you think that he responded to that? He acted like I was crazy. He was like, "No way. I'm not doing this. This is ridiculous. You want me to call his wife that just lost her husband, and you want me to tell her Boston is okay?" I'm like, well, we ended up compromising. I said to him, because I knew beyond a doubt that what I experienced was real. And I knew I had to get the message to his wife. So I said, "I'll tell you what, how about if I send an email to you, I tell you about the dream, and you forward it to his sister-in-law, his wife's sister." My husband knew her because they both worked in the financial field, in investment banking. So he said, "Okay." He said, "Okay, you send me the email, I'll forward it to her." So I wrote an email. He sends it to the sister, right, Richard's sister-in-law. And he said the minute he hit send, he was like, "Oh my God, I shouldn't have done that." He even asked the tech team, "Is there a way to retrieve an email?" Because he regretted doing it. But me, I was happy because I knew I did what I was supposed to do. So now go 2 weeks later, we're at the Jersey Shore and we're on vacation. And my husband gets a message. He had a BlackBerry at the time. And he gets a message on his BlackBerry. And basically, you know how you read something and you don't quite get it? So he's reading it to me. And it's basically a message from the sister-in-law. And she's saying, "I don't know how your wife could have known this. Is there some way she could have known?" Now, I never met him, never met his wife, didn't know anything about his family. Well, she had a brother in Boston. Remember, he said to me, "Boston is okay." She had a brother in Boston. She was considering selling her home in moving to Boston, but felt guilty because, she just lost her husband and all that. So when he read it to me, I didn't quite get it. We both looked at each other and he read it again. It was like, no, this can't be. And then he read it again and I went, then it kind of hit me like, oh my God. So at that point, I realized that somebody who is deceased contacted me with a message for his wife. And to say that that was life changing is an understatement. I haven't considered life the same way since. But after, I didn't really know what to do. What do I do? Who do I talk to about this? And then I was also afraid, well, what if I talk to people and they think I'm crazy? And one day I'm talking to my sister-in-law, Shari, and she looked at me and she goes, don't you realize that you've been given a gift? And when she said that, it kind of hit me. I'm like, you know what? You're right. I have been given a gift. And I should share this and hopefully help other people, help the bereaved, understand that life continues and that they will see their loved ones again. So I started investigating the phenomena. And interestingly, one of the first persons that I reached out to, her name was Juliet Nightingale. And she had a radio show called Toward the Light. And I wrote her and I basically was asking her questions. And it was very odd because she wrote back to me and she said, Josie, I'm meant to help you. So I'm going to help you. And I'm like, you're meant to help? She said, yes, I'm one of the people that are meant to help you. And she had me on her radio show and word got out. And I basically started collecting stories from around the world. And that is how Visits from Heaven came into being. But at first, when I first started researching, I didn't do it with the intention of writing a book, to be honest. It was more because I needed to know that I wasn't alone. But as the research progressed and I had all these stories and I realized, boy, I need to write a book. I need to get this information out there. And that's how Visits from Heaven came into being. And I know that I was led to do what I do. In fact, I've been told that many times after Visits from Heaven came out. In fact, actually, while I was writing Visits from Heaven, I came across so many incredible near-death experiences. And I thought to myself, I need to follow this book up with near-death experiences. So I wrote Visits to Heaven after Visits from Heaven, okay? And what happened was I was going to be on a radio show in New York. And before I left for the show, I just made a casual comment to my husband. I said, John, I wonder why I haven't heard from Rich. He changed my life. Visits from Heaven came out. Now I'm working on another book, and this is all because of him. And why haven't I heard from him since, And that was it. So I get picked up. We go to New York, and I'm in like a common area waiting for the producers to call us into the studio. And as I'm standing there, there's a 17-year-old psychic medium, okay? And he basically looks at me and he says, Josie, I have a gentleman here for you. So I'm doing this. I'm like, where is he? Kind of thing. And he says, no, in spirit. And he starts describing him. And I looked at him and I said, oh my God, it's Rich. And he kind of looked over my shoulder and he said, yes, it's Rich. He said to tell you that you were led to ARE Press, which is what the name of the publisher. You were led to ARE Press. You were led to do what you do. Oh, and by the way, he says, that book that you're working on, it's not coming out when you think it's coming out. It's coming out 2 months later. And at that point, I'm like, what? We got called into the studio, and to be honest, I didn't get to finish my conversation with him. We did the radio show, and I kind of forgot about it. A couple weeks later, I got a message from the publisher, and guess what? She says, Josie, the book isn't coming out in December. It's coming out in February. So just like he said, 2 months later. So you can't you can't make this up. You really can't.
So, what was your worldview before this happened? What was your kind of faith process, your
People,
view of the afterlife, that kind of thing?
people ask me that all the time. They ask me, did I believe in the afterlife beforehand, and have I ever had any experiences? And to be perfectly honest, did I believe? Yes, but did I ever doubt? I would say I doubted before my experience, but do I doubt now? No, absolutely not. Because it's kind of like it's kind of like a known beyond known. I remember before I had my experience, I was pregnant with my daughter Erica, and I had gone for an emeo. Okay, the amniocentesis, and they told me that my daughter had Down syndrome. The baby had Down syndrome, and I was obviously devastated. Okay, obviously devastated. And when the doctor called me, he scheduled more tests, and I went for the additional test. But that night, I got on my hands and knees and I prayed to my grandmother. I always believed in praying to those on the other side. So I got on my knees and I prayed to my grandmother, and then I went to bed that night. And that night, I had the most profound dream. My grandmother lived in an old two-family house, and you would go into the foyer, and she lived about, I would say, to about 12 steps to get to the second floor where she lived. So I walk into the house, and I look up, and I see my grandmother at the top of the stairs, and she's holding a baby, and I knew that it was a baby girl. And she said to me, "Don't worry, everything's going to be okay." And she's holding the baby, right? I woke up and I was like, "Oh my God, wow, what was what was that?" Well, I went for another test. The doctor called me up and told me that my baby was completely fine, healthy. So so that happened before my experience with Rich. So did I believe? Yes. But now I more or less no, I would say. Now it's like a known beyond known. It's kind of like this. It's one thing to write about the experiences, write books and talk about the experiences, but it's another thing to actually experience them. You know, for those of us that have had these experiences, no proof is necessary because we had our proof. I mean, for me to have that experience with Rich, when I was in the moment, I knew it was real, but then he validated it for me. He validated it not only for me, but really for his wife. And that shook me to the core. And like I said, my life hasn't been the same since. And that led me on this current journey. If you would have said 25 years ago, Josie, you're going to be writing about the paranormal, I would have said you're crazy. No, no, no. But I guess you could say I listened to that inner voice. And because I listened to that voice, because I followed my intuition, I'm sitting here with you now, you know. And that's what it takes. It takes trusting. It takes trust. When we have these spiritual experiences, when we have these dreams, or when we have these messages from the other side, because I'm very clairaudient, I can hear spirit, and a lot of times it has to do with timing. How do we know? How do we know that it's real? Well, one of the things is timing. When I had I won't tell you what birthday, but I had a big birthday, and I had said to my godmother, because she's deceased, I said, it's a big birthday, Lucy. I want a sign today. Kind of talking to her in the morning, and my mother and her were very good friends. And that day we went shopping. And as we're walking to go into the store, I look down and I see a dime. Now, my godmother died in 2010, and she's always sending me dimes. So I see it, I automatically pick it up, I look at it, it's the year of my birth. And I thought, you know, all right, put it in my pocket, go in the store, come out. In the same spot is another dime. Okay? The same spot is another dime. I'm like, oh my gosh. I pick it up. It's in the year of her death, 2010. So that's what I mean by timing. And another thing is, like I said, a known beyond known. For those of us that have had these experiences, no proof is needed. So you just know, and you can just tell. I guess. But that basically is a big thing, timing.
When you say, so you feel that, correct me if I'm wrong here, but you said that you feel like you're clairvoyant as well, right?
Yes, I can, and it's interesting because I'm also hearing impaired. But I've heard many messages from spirit. I'll give you an example that I think is a good one to demonstrate that. One of my most, I don't know, this story really touched me. It's called Misty Angel, and it's in Visits from Heaven. So this girl, she's 15 years old, and she passed away. And on the anniversary of her death, her mother and her friends were getting together in her honor, and they were going to have a lunch. So the mother decides to go out to the car to get some equipment. And she said when she went out to the car, she looked up and she saw this car out of control coming right toward her. And she heard her daughter, Mr. Angel's voice, and she said she literally felt her body. She couldn't see her, but she said she literally felt her body holding her back. And she said, and then all of a sudden, another car comes out of nowhere, diverts the first car. The first car then flips over on the other side of the road. Okay? And now she's standing out. Whatever she felt in front of her goes away. She's like frazzled. She walks across. The guy gets out of a car, ends up being drunk. Okay? Not a scratch. Gets out of a car. Comes up to her and says, Miss, where's the girl? And she says, what do you mean? He said, the girl that was standing in front of you. Can you imagine? So this guy could see the spirit of her daughter.
So in this case, this is a verifiable, or like
exactly,
a veridical case.
And that's another thing. That's another way you can tell with these evidential cases like this. I mean, how else do you explain something like that? But let me get back to the Clairaudience thing. So that story had was special to me because while I was writing the story, I told the mother, I almost felt like, the daughter was like whispering in my ear as I was working on that chapter. And she told me before I told her that, she said, oh, that's funny because I commented that it was almost like she was whispering in your ear because I thought the story was written so perfectly. It's almost like she wrote it. So that really got me. But after the book came out, I'm in my room and I'm just folding laundry. And all of a sudden I hear, call my mom. Call my mom. Intuitively, Justin, I knew that it was Angel. I don't know how. I can't explain how. I don't know. But intuitively, I knew it was her. And I'm like, oh, what do I do? Well, I have to trust that voice. I tell people to trust that voice. So I have to trust that voice. So I went and I got the folder with all the contributors and their contact information. And I called the mother. And do you know what she said to me? She said, Josie, do you know what today is? Today is my birthday. And I was like, oh. So I said, okay then, happy birthday from Angel. So that is, an example of listening to your inner voice. So I have gotten messages like that. And you know what's funny? Obviously, being hearing impaired, I question sometimes what I hear. But when I hear it clairaudiently, when I hear it through spirit, there's never a doubt in what I hear. So that's interesting.
What do you, and this is a difficult question, I'll preface with that, but what do you think that voice is? What do you attribute that to?
Well, when we're in spirit form, obviously we don't have a body. So the way that we communicate is through telepathy. It's telepathic communication. We communicate mind to mind. Or, so that is just the way that we communicate in spirit. And we can do that here on earth as well. We all have that inner voice. All of us do. We just have to learn how to listen to it. If you really quiet your mind, if you meditate and you really quiet your mind, you'd be surprised what you hear. But you have to learn to listen to it. You have to learn to trust it. And to be honest, it's not an easy thing to do. Because not everybody is going to have a visit from heaven or an encounter like I did. And hopefully, reading my books or watching podcasts like this will help them to trust, but it's not as easy for them as it is for me because not everyone has an experience like that. I wish everyone could. I really do.
Well, let's talk about A Call from Heaven. I guess first, you had written the previous two books, and you touched on that a little bit. What inspired this third book? What made you feel like you needed to write this one?
It's I'm glad you asked that because there's a reason behind every single one of my books. One night I went for a physical with my primary care, and I walked into his office. His name is Dr. Toro. He's since retired, and I wish he didn't retire. I miss him. He was a good guy, a good guy. But I walked into his office, and he looked at me and he said, "Hey, Josie, hey, you working on any more books?" And at the time, I was working on a book called Divine Visits, which is about divine encounters and things like that. And I said to him, what do you think about that? Do you believe, or do you think it's a case of the brain, hypoxia, anything like that? And he looked at me and he said, well, in fact, no. I do believe. In fact, I had an experience this week. And I said, you did? I said, what happened? He told me that he had a patient and they couldn't do anything more for her. So they were going to move her to a different hospital. So he walked into the room, and when he walked in, he said her family was there, a bunch of people there. And he told her that they were going to move her. And she looked at him and she said, no, it's my time. And she said, my grandson is here. Well, then he found out that her grandson, the grandson she was referring to, was killed in the Iraq War. And then she's going, talking coherently to everybody, joking with her best friend, saying, oh, it doesn't mean that you can marry my husband and things like that. So he was saying she was completely coherent. And then all of a sudden, she said, okay, I'm ready. And she died a few minutes later. So he said to me, no, I'm a believer. He said, that just happened. And that story really got to me. And I went home and I started researching deathbed phenomena or divine, deathbed visits, if you will. And that it was the start of A Call from Heaven. And it really is incredible, it's like the more I know or the more I do research, the more I need to know. Life is such a mystery. There's so much that we don't know. But working on that book was truly amazing. It really opened me up. For one thing, there's something called peak and Darien experiences. And I know you've had Dr. Bruce Grayson on your show. Well, Dr. Grayson wrote a paper about these experiences. And what this basically is, Justin, it's when somebody is on their deathbed, okay? and they mentioned the presence of someone whose death they had no knowledge. In other words, if I had a cousin that passed away a week ago and I'm on my deathbed and I didn't know this cousin passed away, and I said, "Oh, why is she here? Like, how did you know that?" Okay, so he wrote a paper about this, and one of the stories that I absolutely love, and I tell this one all the time, is a little kid named Eddie Cuomo, and Eddie is in the hospital. He had a raging fever. Okay, he finally comes out of his fever, and he tells his family that he went to the other side. He saw his uncle, he saw his grandfather, he's saying all these people that he saw. Then all of a sudden, he says to his mother and father, "Oh, and I saw Teresa." That was his sister. And she told me that I need to go back, that it wasn't my time. But the father became very upset because Teresa was his 19-year-old sister that was away at college. And he said, "What are you talking about? I just talked to your sister 2 days ago. What are you talking about?" Kind of thing. Well, they went home. They had a call from the university. The sister actually died in a car accident just after midnight. So they were not aware of her death. And here he is, he comes through, and he basically tells them that he had a conversation with his sister on the other side. So how do you explain that? So when I was researching for that book, those types of stories really got to me. And another thing is what we call terminal lucidity. Okay, you're on your deathbed and you can't speak or anything. You're incoherent, but yet moments before you die, you're suddenly able you become lucid, and you're suddenly able to talk to your loved ones and say goodbye to your loved ones, and then you pass away. And how do you explain that? There's a story that I have in the book by a doctor named Scott Haig in New York, and he had a patient. He had cancer, and the cancer spread to his brain to the point where he had no brain cells left, and he was incoherent, couldn't talk, couldn't move, nothing. There's a nurse in the room. All of a sudden, the patient wakes up, okay? Wakes up to the shock of everybody, and for about 10 minutes, and he's able to say his goodbyes to his family, and then he passes away. Now, what happens to the brain? Does the brain suddenly recover and now have brain cells? No. The brain is exactly the way it was before, yet they're able to somehow become lucid right before death and say, and that's something that they don't have an explanation for. I have an aunt that died from Alzheimer's disease, and that didn't happen to her. So why does that happen to some people and not others? I don't know. But it's pretty remarkable when you think about it. There is a doctor, Dr. Alexander Bethany, at the University of Vienna, and he was actually studying this. He was studying patients with Alzheimer's disease and seeing what happens before death and all that. And I don't know if he finished his research, but I hope so.
Yeah, that's a really interesting point because I remember we've mentioned Bruce Grayson. I feel like we're doing an ad for his books in this episode, but in his book After,
Mm-hmm.
I was in my car, was listening to that book, and it's one of the things that spurred my interest in this is when he started talking about terminal lucidity, and he introduced the filter theory and how that made sense to him.
Mm-hmm.
Because I've worked in healthcare and I've said many times, I've encountered patients who would tell stories like this, and my initial response would be, "Oh, they had a hallucination."
Right.
And then over time, you see that a lot of the explanations we have for where these things are coming from, they just don't make sense.
That don't make
Um,
sense. Exactly.
we don't have the answers in a materialistic model, which is just fascinating to think about.
But maybe we shouldn't be looking at the material. Maybe in studying the non-physical, we can understand the physical. Do you understand what I mean? I really think that the only way that we will come to understand life and the physical is by studying the non-physical. And by the way, After was one of my favorite books, so I concur with that.
Yeah, we should just, everybody that watches this and sees this, go pick up After.
Yeah, wonderful book.
As well as pick up After, as well as A Call from Heaven. But let's talk about Call from Heaven a little bit more. So you mentioned terminal lucidity and deathbed visions. Did you write about any shared death experiences in your book?
I don't think so. Well, in a sense, where there was one where mist was coming out of the body, and other people could see it in the room. That's the thing about these experiences. Okay, you mentioned hallucinations. Okay, but there's a big difference between these experiences and hallucinations. When you hallucinate, it's psychotic, they're fearful, they're not coherent, and they can't be shared, okay, when you are hallucinating. But when you have these deathbed visits, they can be shared, they can be seen by others in the room, okay? They are coherent, they are peaceful, okay? They are not psychotic. So there's a big difference between the two. There's another case where a woman was in the room, and the father was seeing a portal in the room, and she could see that something was happening in the room. There was another one where he actually could see that the man that was in the room, he could actually see him going up. Like he kind of like, when his spirit left his body, he says it was almost like he went with him, and then he went back to his body. So that is a shared death experience. There was one where a woman named Anne who was in the UK, and her mother was dying here in the United States, and she felt sick, like physically sick, and she realized that was because she was sharing some of the physical symptoms that her mother was having here in the States. So again, how do you explain that? And what people say to me all the time is, well, why does that happen to some people and not others? I don't know. I mean, does it have to do with maybe certain people are more approachable? Or like when you look at me, for instance, after I had my experience, Justin, I thought, why me? Why did it come to me and not go directly to his wife? Okay? And then I realized something. Well, first of all, he was able to get through to me. And second of all, he knew that I was going to get that message to his wife. And say he did go directly to his wife, she might have said, well, I'm just thinking that because I feel guilty because, I'm wondering if I should go to Boston, and, that's just wishful thinking. She might have second guessed her message. So there's a lot of reasons why they go to somebody else. I don't know, but maybe because, like I said before, he told me that I was led to do what I do. So this is like the push I needed, I guess, to go on this path. And I've never looked back, but it's hard sometimes. It's overwhelming. And what do you say to a mother that says, I don't, why haven't I heard from my daughter? So um, sometimes it gets very hard, but I have to focus on the fact that I am helping people. One of the most special messages that I ever got was a woman who lost her husband. And after she read A Call from Heaven, she wrote me a note and she said, Josie, because of you, I can sleep tonight. And that meant the world. It really did. So you can't put a price on something like this. I do it to help others, and I hope that my message is getting out there, and I hope that I can look back and say that I'm making a difference.
So that would you say that's your biggest motivator right now is being able to encourage people who have are bereaved?
Yeah, like I'm not trying to change minds. I remember when I was working on Visits from Heaven, and I had a friend who was a psychic medium, and he said to me, you're not going to change minds, Josie. And I looked at him and I said, but that's okay because I'm not trying to change minds. I'm looking to open minds. There's a difference between being, closed minded and open minded. And, skepticism is a good thing. It's a good thing to be skeptical. It's a good thing to doubt because there's a lot of fraud out there. There's a lot of people that are taking advantage of the bereaved. But as long as you are open minded, because when you are open minded, you're open to new ways of thinking, you're open to new perspectives. But when you're closed minded, you won't consider anything. So the way I always say, it's a good thing to be skeptical as long as you are open minded.
What about you? Did you encounter skepticism yourself when you started this process? And what I mean is there's always going to be external skeptics, but for you, did you ever think, oh, this has got to be my mind playing tricks on me, or was it something that you just felt you could embrace quickly?
Only, like I said before my experience, yes. Did I ever doubt? Sure, there were times when I doubted. I wondered, is this just me? Is this just me wanting to hear from my loved one or my grandmother at the time? So before my experience, yes. After my experience, no. Like I said, I think of it as a known beyond known, and it's hard for me to put into words. How do you explain the unexplainable? I mean, really, how do you explain the unexplainable? But no, there's no doubt in my mind. I've never had any doubt after my experience. Like I said, after my experience, I went to my husband and I told him he had to get this message to his wife and uh, Rich's wife, and he responded like I was crazy. So it's not easy because there are people in my life, some friends and some family members that don't believe. Um, and it's not easy sometimes, but that's okay. I'm not telling people what to believe in. I'm just hoping that people can be a little open-minded. I remember once my father passed away in February 2022, and I remember we were having dinner one day, and my father looked at me and said, why do you write about this stuff? He said, why don't you write about love? And I looked at him and I said, Dad, I am writing about love. I'm writing about love in its highest form. That's what I said to him. And we talked about it, and I told him one day, you'll see, I'm right. So my father passed away from brain cancer, and it was January 13th, 2022, when we found out. And the day he found out, my mother and father came to my house to come stay with me so I could help take care of him. So we set up a bed in the family room and everything. And that night I go to bed and I have a very lucid, vivid dream again. And in the dream, I see my Uncle Tony, my father's brother, in the front, and my aunt uh, Mary, and my aunt Rosina, and my Uncle Angelo in the back, all Italian, of course. So they're in a row, and my uncle's in the front, and he looks at me, and he says, again, telepathically, he says, don't worry. He says, don't worry. I'm the one who's going to come for him. And then that was it. So when my cousins came to visit, and I said, oh, Uncle Tony is going to come for my father. 2 weeks later, he got progressively worse. My father's laying there and he says, is my brother Tony dead? And we said, yeah, Dad, he died a while ago. Why? Well, if he's dead, then why is he here? Why is he coming and visiting me? And I was like, oh. So I said, Dad, is Uncle Tony here? And he said, yes. I said, are there other people here? And he said, yes. I said, do you know everyone else? Do you know everybody that's here? He said, no, which was interesting. So I asked my mother at the time, I said, can you give me a minute with Dad, alone? So I sat next to my father and I looked at him and I said, Dad? And he said, yes. I said, was I right? And what I meant by that is, was I right? I've been telling you there is life after death. I've been telling you there is an afterlife. Was I right? And he looked at me and he said, yes. And even now, when I tell that story, I get choked up because it really meant the world to me. It brought me a lot of peace, to hear my father say that. And I hope that I can share some of that peace with everyone else out there through my books and everything else that I do. But it truly, it meant the world to me to see that with my own father.
Did your father believe in life after death prior to
I don't,
that?
I don't think so because he believed in God and heaven, but every time I would write these books, he would, he didn't quite understand the meaning behind it. He wasn't the kind of person to sit there and talk about it. Maybe I don't know if he believed it the way I did, but I definitely think that he believed in God and angels and things like that. So pretty amazing when you think about it.
Yeah. Yeah, it is amazing. Did you encounter angelic visions in any of these stories that you researched?
Yeah, I'll tell you an amazing story that happened to me. I was in the process of finishing Divine Visits. I was almost finished with the book, and I had to go for my mammogram. So I go for the mammogram, and they said everything was okay. I go home, and then I get a message, "Oh, you need to come back. We see something on the left side." Of course, then I start to get really nervous. I I go back to the doctor, and they had to do a needle biopsy. So they do the needle biopsy, and to make a long story short, it did not look good at all. But while the X-ray technician she's in there and she's scanning, my breast and everything. I'm laying there, and she kept like doing this one spot, and I knew, oh boy, you know how you just know. So I'm laying there and I'm thinking, oh wow, this isn't good. This isn't good. And all of a sudden she says, Josie, I'll be right back. I'm gonna go talk to the doctor. She did one of those. And I'm like, oh my God, oh my God. So I was very close to my godmother. And my godmother was extremely religious, extremely. I always went to church, everything like that. Um, in fact, I used to tell her, hey, Lucy, if anybody's going to heaven, it's you, because she is so, so religious. So I'm laying there. The technician leaves, and I'm there, and I didn't know what to do. So I started praying, because I knew it wasn't good. And I cried out to my godmother, and I said, Lucy, if I ever needed you, Lucy, I need you now. Please help. And with that, all of a sudden, I see this white orb come down from the ceiling. Now, you got to remember, I'm laying on the table. I see this white orb. I'm like mesmerized. So I'm watching it. The way I could describe it, maybe about 3-4 inches wide. Okay, bright white, but not blinding. Okay, so it's coming down. It stops about 4 inches above my chest and then goes to the right. And when it did that, I reached out to it because I felt such peace. I knew that this was angelic, that this was the divine, and I just felt such peace. And I thought, well, okay, two things here. Either this is happening because I'm going to be cured, or this is happening because it's my time, which is it? So I reached out my hand, and when I did that, the center of the orb became purple. And I'm watching this, like amazed, just like laying there watching it. And the purple is getting bigger and bigger. And all of a sudden, the technician walks back in, and that's it. The orb goes away. And I'm like laying there, like, oh my God, oh my God, oh my God. Now she's talking, and I can't even hear what she's saying. I don't even know what she's saying because my mind is focused on what just happened, right? So that happens. I come home, I tell my husband, and we were just like shocked. And again, I didn't know what that meant. I was thinking, okay, either that's it, it's my time, or God intervened, Well, I get a phone call from the doctor. My husband stayed home from work because he was so nervous because we didn't know what kind of news we were going to get. And basically, Justin, he said to me, I don't understand it. He said, it looked like cancer, and now it's not there. He said, I don't know. I don't understand it. And as he's saying this, I'm sobbing. I'm sobbing. And he's on the other phone, on the other line, going, no, it's a good thing. It's a good thing. And I'm like, yeah, no, it's a good thing, So to make a long story short, I've been fine. Let me knock on something. I've been fine ever since. And that's another thing. And interestingly, I had a reading with a psychic medium one time, a guy named Artie Hoffman. And he said to me, he goes, I don't know what they mean by this, but they're telling me that you're going to experience a piece of heaven on earth. That's what he said to me. He goes, you're gonna experience a piece of heaven on earth. And I wonder, was that it? Because I can't even begin to tell you how amazing that was. I couldn't even speak after that. I mean, but I wasn't afraid, like when I saw it, just peace came over me, and I'm like, oh my God, this is divine. This is incredible. Like, what did I do to deserve this kind of thing? And like I said, we were just talking about, I had another mammogram shortly, like a month ago, and we were talking about the experience. So, knock on wood, I'm still fine. But yes, ironically though, here I am in the midst of finishing divine visits, and then I have my own divine visits. So it's kind of, I don't know, it's amazing.
Yeah, that's an incredible story. And I don't think I've heard one quite like that from somebody firsthand.
Yeah,
Does it
and like I said, how do you like, you can try to put something like that into words, you know, but even describing it to you, I can't describe how magnificent that was. To actually see that orb descend from the ceiling, um, like it was like it was so bright, but there were no rays coming out of it or anything. It wasn't blinding. It was just pure white, and it just slowly came down and stopped above my chest, and then went to the right. So yeah, and like I said, I'm grateful that I'm still here, and everything is okay.
when do those experiences like that, and the stories that you've researched and the people that I'm sure you've met along the way, um, how has it changed you? Do you find yourself praying more, meditating more to become or to be able to be more in touch with that?
I'm like everybody else. I have my moments. My father's death was hard on me. My people say all the time, Josie, Is it easier now when you lose a loved one? You know what I say? It's easier, but it's not easy. So I am like everybody else. I'm still mourning my father. Um, does it make me pray a little more sometimes? Um, I feel more in touch with the spiritual side of myself, I guess you could say. And I sometimes have a hard time meditating because my mind is all over the place, you know. But when I'm able to meditate, I hear things. I get messages from the other side. Like I said, we all have that ability. It's a matter of, some of us are better at it than others, and it takes work. But we all have that intuitive side. We just need to tap into it.
Do you see yourself um, continuing just pursuing, encouraging people who have suffered loss, or what type of work do you want to do next in terms of your research?
Well, the book that I'm working on right now is it's a combination of all of my research into one book, and it basically presents my case for an afterlife. Because when you think about it, it's not just about near-death experiences or afterlife communication or what I call visits from heaven. You have reincarnation and deathbed phenomena, premonitions, like all these different things that highlight the spiritual side of ourselves. So it basically puts all of my research into one book. So that's what I'm working on now. And another thing that I'm doing is I actually wrote my first young adult fiction novel. And the book does deal with the paranormal. It does deal with, I can't give it away, but it does deal with the paranormal. It does deal with the afterlife. So I do see myself continuing in this. I've been asked to do a YouTube channel. I've been asked to do a podcast. So I hope that I would do that next. But it's been, I've had a lot of things that have gone on these past few years between the death of my father and a lot of other personal things that have held me back a little. But I'm still dedicated to it. But I'm like everybody else. Sometimes it gets overwhelming. Sometimes it gets hard. But I still see myself researching the afterlife and hopefully doing a podcast or a YouTube channel. We did a pilot based on my book. I would like to see that obviously get picked up. So there's a lot of. I don't ever see myself leaving this. It's who I am. Like I said, when you have an experience like this, it changes you. It changes your whole perspective on life. It changes your goals in life. You don't care about the physical things anymore. You know, it doesn't matter how much money you have, how many houses you own, all that physical stuff doesn't matter. You can't take any of that with you. But you know what you can take with you? You can take with that love. That love is the one thing that you can take with you. And you can take those memories with you. You can take the non-physical with you. So I do see myself continuing to do this because for me, it's in helping others that we help ourselves. You know, and I want to continue sharing this message that love never dies. And hopefully, like I said, when I'm gone, that's what I hope people will remember me by. Hopefully, I would have made a difference and hopefully still make a difference after I'm on the other side. We'll see.
What would you say to someone who might see this or hear this and be interested in reading your books? What do you think people can gain from those books?
Well, it depends, honestly. Why are you reading the book? Are you reading the book because you are a bereaved parent? Are you reading the book because you're searching for the meaning of life, for instance? And because, people say to me, well, what now? Justin, do I believe in the afterlife? Yes. But what does that say about us? What does that say about the physical body? So once you understand that life continues, once you understand that, there is an afterlife, what does that say about us? Well, for one thing, it says that we are much more than the physical body. We are spiritual beings having a human experience, not the other way around. We go from when we are born, we go from spirit to physical. When we die, we go from physical to spirit, and it's a continuation like that.
Well, I want to be respectful of your time, and I truly appreciate you doing this. And I also wanted to say, because we had talked off air, obviously, I am sorry for the losses that you've had.
Thank you.
Um, but I appreciate you doing this and just encouraging more people that are going through times like this where they've lost someone. So I think there's definitely a really important role that you play in encouraging folks like that.
Yeah, I think it's important for people to hear these stories. You know, like some of the stories in A Call from Heaven. There was one called Shankar that really got to me. So the girl is in the hospital room with her father, and all of a sudden, she's Indian, and the father, she said, kind of like had to stretch his head to look over her shoulder to get to the door. So he's looking at the door, and he started saying, Amma, Amma, which means mother. He said, "Oh, you finally come," you know. And at that time, she told me, she goes, "Josie, I was thinking, okay, he's on his deathbed. Who doesn't want to see their mother or be with their mother? Maybe he was just saying mother for that reason." But then she said about an hour later, he started saying, "Oh, Shankar, where have you been?" And she said at that point, Shankar was the name of his brother-in-law. She said a man that he did not like. Okay, his uncle, I think it was, that he did not like. Okay, so she starts thinking, well, wait a minute. Why would he cry out? Why would he mention the name of someone he didn't even like? So she meets with the doctor, Justin, and she asked the doctor about what her father was saying, and the doctor pretty much said, "Oh yeah, well, that can happen. He was just hallucinating." But she told me, she goes, "You know what? I don't believe that." She said it's one thing to call out to his mother, but it's another thing to say that Shankar, a man that he didn't even like, was in the room. So I think it's important to hear these stories. You know, it really is. Um, I could go on and on. One of them, I think one of my favorite ones from Visits from Heaven was one called Flick the Lights, and that one has a personal meaning to me. So remember I told you I had an uncle, Uncle Tony, that passed away that I was very close to, my father's brother. Well, my uncle passed away, and his daughter Maria was having a colonoscopy, and she was under anesthesia. And she said, while she was having the anesthesia, she saw her father, and she said my Uncle Tony was standing in front of a table, and behind him are my three uncles. And she noticed that one chair was empty. And she said, I felt like he was telling me that he wanted me to notice this empty chair. And he said to her, Maria, don't be sad. Why are you crying for me? Look how happy I am, right? And she said, all of a sudden, she heard the nurse waking her up. And she said she didn't want to wake up because it was so peaceful. So she wakes up. She goes home. And when she goes home, she finds out that her neighbor, Barry, passed away that day. And she said to herself, oh my gosh, could that be the empty chair? Well, let's go back 2 weeks before. 2 weeks before, he goes to her house and he tells her he was going to take his kids to Hershey, Pennsylvania. And he said, this is the last time you're going to see me. And she said, oh, what do you mean? Of course not. Well, he ended up coming back home in an ambulance and he went into hospice. So she goes to see him and she said, for some reason, she, knelt down and she said, Barry, when you get to heaven, let me know that you and my father are okay. She said, for some reason, I told him to flick the lights, okay? So on this day, she finds out that Barry passed away, okay? The day of a colonoscopy. She goes to sleep. She wakes up at 3 a.m. Can't sleep. Goes downstairs, makes her way over to the window in the front, and happens to look across the street, which is where Barry lived. So she's looking at his house, and all of a sudden, his porch light flicks on and off, on and off. She's looking at it, shocked, and it kind of unnerved her, and she runs up the steps. Okay? The next night, Justin, she wakes up, 3 a.m., and now she's like, oh my gosh. Goes downstairs, goes to the window again, looks across the street. On, off, on, off. She panics, runs upstairs, goes to sleep. Third night, gets up again, looks at the clock, 3 a.m. And now she's anxious. Now she said the third time, she was like, okay, this is a message, And she gets out of bed, she goes downstairs, goes to the window, on, off, 3 times in a row. And at that point, she acknowledged the sign. She said, okay, Barry, I get it. I know it's you telling me that you and my father are okay. After that, she didn't wake up anymore. She didn't wake up at 3 a.m. the next night. But here's the kicker. So a few months later, she runs into Barry's wife, okay? Just says, oh, by the way, you know that porch light? Do you have a motion sensor on there or something? Do you know what the wife said? Oh, no. In fact, that light hasn't had a bulb in years. Didn't have a bulb.
Wow.
But yeah, but it still gives me goosebumps when I tell that story. But yet
Wow.
it was going on and off. So my cousin called me today, and we were talking about that story. So that is definitely one of my favorites.
Yeah, that's an incredible story. It's
Yeah,
it's crazy how many of these have some why it seems to happen in the middle of the night with some of these stories. But
yeah,
we we had Dr. Rowlett on I believe last year, and she was talking about a woman who had a phone call from her deceased father in the
yep.
middle of the night. And that was one of the ones that really stuck with me because prior to that, I had never heard of communication like from a deceased loved one through a phone in any form. And that was just, and I said, well, I'm sure that's less of an occurrence now since we all have smartphones. And she was like, actually, it's way more common now than it was with landlines to
But
see
what did
that
she
type of
say?
thing.
Did she actually get to communicate with him? Did she hear his voice and communicate with him, or what happened?
Yes, she did. Yeah, if I'm remembering the case correctly, it was actually what made it interesting is her husband heard the conversation. He was in bed with her. Phone rang. She answered the phone, spoke with her father, and then her husband the next day was like, "Who called? What were you talking about?" And um, I believe there was something that the father wanted to communicate to her mother that and she said, "Well, why wouldn't you just tell her?" And the father said something along the lines of, "I tried and she won't listen." Um,
Mhm.
so I think it's really interesting with these kind of, you know, especially
There's a
when there's a
story. Yeah, yeah.
yeah, yeah, it's a
There's a
story that's hard to
story in
refute.
Exactly. But there's a story like that in Visits from Heaven. A mother who comes home, and she said it was Easter Sunday, and she gets a message on her answering machine. So she presses the button, and then she's listening to the messages, and then at the end it says, that's it. You don't have any more messages. And then all of a sudden, she hears static. And she said she's wondering what's wrong with the machine. Now she thought, okay, maybe I need to get a new answering machine. And all of a sudden, she hears her son's voice. And her son said, "Hey." And she said whenever he would call, that was his signature greeting. He would say, "Hey." And it's right there on the answering machine. And she said, if she didn't tell people, she wouldn't tell people that was a message that she just got. And she would say, "Okay, well, whose voice is that?" And they said, "That's Michael's voice." So yes, Justin, it does happen. There's another case. I happened to be on the phone with this girl. We were talking about her story. Her fiance passed away. His name was Gerard. Okay. And I told her how she can just ask for a sign because they are always listening to us. When we talk to them, they can hear us. So I'm telling her this, okay? We're having a phone conversation. And she says, as we're talking, she hears that she has a text message, but she doesn't go get her cell phone. She continues talking to me. We hang up. She goes to look at her text message, and the text message said G. And his name was Gerard, and they called him G. And that was why, as she was talking to me, as I was saying, they can hear us. You just, and then of course, she called me up, and she was like, "Oh my God, you never know." So I've had so many of these experiences, and they're hard to, they're hard to explain. But just because we might not have answers for things, just because we can't see something, doesn't mean that it isn't real. When you think about it, and I talk about this in A Call from Heaven, when you talk about the universe, all right, 70% of the universe is dark energy. 25% of the universe is dark matter. 5%, only 5%, is physical matter, everything that you and I can see. So what's the rest of the 95%? Okay, we know it's there because of the gravitational effect. So we know that it's there. We just can't see it. So just because you can't see something, just because you can't understand something, doesn't mean it's not real, doesn't mean it's not there. And as I've said in my book, and as I've said many times, I think it is in studying the non-physical that we will finally come to understand the physical. I really mean that.
Yeah, I think that's well put. Certainly. Because so much, I think one of the core things we try to get across is meaning. Because people have this idea that what I do doesn't matter, um, and tend to focus on the more material parts of life. So messages like this, can have a good impact. And
Yeah, absolutely. It really gets you thinking. It helps you to understand that life has purpose, life has meaning. We're not here by accident. Like I said before, once you understand that life continues, okay, but what does that say about us? It means that we are much more than the physical, and we are all here for a reason. And it's a matter. I'll give you another example. I have a very good friend, Santina, and she's had a lot of different things happen. Okay, and one of her stories in Visits from Heaven, it's called White Tulips. So she has this dream, and in the dream, she hears the doorbell in her dream, and she goes and she opens the door, and there standing there is a woman with white tulips, and she says to her, to my friend Santina, she says, give these to Kathy and tell her that I'm okay. So Santina wakes up from the dream and she's thinking to herself, how am I going to say this to Kathy? How do I even? So they were friends. Their kids went to school together. And a little while later, she happens to see her at a school function, and she got enough nerve, to go up to her. And she went up to her and she said, I have a question for you. And she said, yeah. She goes, what was your mother's favorite flower? And she said, my mother loved white tulips. And at that point, she goes, oh, okay, I have to tell her now. And she told her, she said, well, I had a dream about your mom. She said to give you white tulips, and she said to let you know that she's okay. So if we follow through on the messages that we receive and we actually share them, what a difference, what a difference we can make. Like the instance I told you before about the girl Angel. When I called her mother, I was nervous. When I called her mother but then I find out, oh, Josie, you know what day it is? It's my birthday. Um, I had no way of knowing that. I just listened to that inner voice. So, I think if all of us listen to that voice, we have no idea what awaits us. It definitely changed my life. I'll tell you that.
I
How
think
did
some
you
people
get
are,
in? How did you get into what you do,
oh,
sharing
good
the
question.
paranormal?
I'm not used to these being thrown back at me.
I'm not allowed.
No, you could say whatever you want. It's your episode. First of all, I think you should do a podcast. I'll say that. But uh, I got interested in this by there were a few things. One, I have had experiences where I've spent the majority of my career in the emergency department. So I see people coming in very ill. Sometimes you find cancer
Hmm.
cases. Sometimes it's trauma. But I would encounter patients who said, I had surgery and I remember floating above my body and I saw, the doctor, he was doing this. And of course, it's a doctor that I know because he works in the building. And
Uh-huh.
then they're telling me what's happening in the waiting room, what's happening in the hospital. And, I would walk out of the room and go, I think something is wrong with the patient and roommate. And after a while, though, it starts to be one of those things where you think maybe I'm the one that's not getting this.
Exactly.
Um, and then after that, honestly, Bruce Grayson's work is something that, finding clinical studies that I could look at. That's the thing that really turned me on to having more of these conversations because I realized that this is not those people having experiences and those people should feel comfortable sharing their experiences. So I want to be clear about that. But it's not those stories. It's the fact that we are finding more and more research in this area that says the materialistic worldview that has been so prominent for so long doesn't really fit what we're seeing. And I think
Right.
I really wanted to be a part of sharing that message. And yeah, life does have
And
meaning. And
and you were led to do what you did. I'm sure. It's like Galileo years ago. What did he say? He said the Earth is not it's round, and everybody thought he was crazy. And now look, you know, I think in the future we're going to be more connected to the spiritual side. Years ago, people didn't die in hospitals. People died at home. It was a very normal occurrence. People were more connected to spirit, and I think that we've lost that along the way. I think that our ancestors were more connected to that. What I found, like I said, I've been doing this for over 20 years. Okay, over the years, people are more apt to share their experience now. I find that more and more people are comfortable sharing their experiences through books like mine, but a lot of people still don't. So when people ask me, well, how common are these experiences? They're very common, but you really can't put a number on it. When I did my research for A Call from Heaven, for example, some places say 53% of people have some form of deathbed phenomena occur, okay? Others point the number at 60%, 70%. One person, a doctor in the UK, said 80%. And what I say in the book, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. William James, he had that famous quote, it's significant to find one white crow in order to upset the notion that all crows are black. So in other words, you just need to find one white crow in order to upset that notion. And here we have tons of stories. So if you can believe just one, you know, what I always say whenever I like write a book or do a radio show or anything, I'm saying if I can reach one person, if I can help one person, I've done my job. So that's my goal. I guess I help people one person at a time. I don't know, but it means something to me. It really does. So, but I agree with you. I mean, I think that more research needs to be done. More research needs to be done into the non-physical. You know, uh, Science needs to open up a little bit. So, and we are getting there. There's been changes over the past 20 years. You see,
Yeah.
you turn on cable, right? Say, there's more movies about the afterlife, I think, than ever before. So, like you said, you want to be part of this, and I am already part of it, and I think that it's a privilege to do it. It's a privilege to be here. And I wouldn't be here, by the way, if I didn't listen to that inner voice. When you think about it, I could have just ignored it, but I didn't. I chose to listen to that inner voice, and because of that, I'm doing what I do today. So I hope this encourages others out there to also listen to that voice.
Yes, I agree with you 100%. I think it is a blessing and a privilege to be able to have these conversations that not be laughed out of whatever realms of work we're involved in. Um,
Yeah.
where can people, if people watch this and listen to this and they say, I'd like um, to talk to Josie or read more about her, where would you recommend that they go?
They can reach out to me on my website, which is www.josievarga.com. You can email me through there, and I try to get back to everybody. Um, and you can also, I have some groups on Facebook. I have Visits from Heaven. The first one is an open group, and then I have a second one that's a closed group. Then I have another one called Proof of the Afterlife. So I started those groups because I wanted to try to help people understand that they are not alone. So people go on there and they share their experiences. So people are welcome to join the group and reach out to me there. And like I said, I do try to, uh, you know, answer everyone. So I'm honored when people get in touch with me.